This is a project that is just now being run or done by Czech PhD students all over the country, and we are focusing on all kinds of aspects of the imprisonment, be it psychological aspects, be it historical aspects, political science is involved in obviously. So there is many ways how to approach the topic, and here's a short content of the presentation that I would like to share with you today. I will start with maybe something which is not very common for this type of activities, but let me just remind the words of the scholars, Renan Halbachs, who saw probably many others. Memory is not history. We have studied, all of us, in a way, history. What me and my colleagues are doing is recording memories, and they are in a way for me much more interesting than history, because memories, they change. History, once we have a democratic approach and we can do history, it shouldn't change. History is always the same, but memory isn't. Memory changes and serves as a tool for confirming collective identity. By that, and this is what I will show also with few reports which I brought with me, there is also the big important thing involved, which is called forgetting. We remember something, but we also forget. And memory legitimizes our will to be acknowledged by the others. So there is a lot of identity issue in it. And I'm not saying that history is not my field, but if I should be labeled, I would prefer to be labeled by being a memorian rather than a historian. But it's just a small introduction just to how I understand that topic and how I approach it. Czechoslovak political prisoners, I just want to give you a short definition. I'm talking about people that were imprisoned in between 1948 and 1960s. Obviously, we had political prisoners even afterwards. Most of you are probably aware that our former president, Václav Havel, he also was a political prisoner, and he was imprisoned in the 70s and 80s, mainly. That doesn't say that he's not a political prisoner, but the type of imprisonment we were researching, we are still researching in our project, those are political prisoners imprisoned in between 1948 and 1960s. I see a big distinction between individual and collective memory, obviously, that's again Halbachs, and history itself. It's a mosaic of different things, and by conducting oral history interviews, I believe we can complement and add to the history and the process of history describing, history writing. The role of the Czechoslovak secret police, particularly in the Czechoslovak case, is extremely powerful because this kind of oppressive institution actually creates political prisoners. So it is naturally involved in our field of study, and the archives are a natural product of these kind of communist institutions. So we are usually contributing to what has been once described by the communist institutions. We are contributing by the stories that we record and try to analyze. That's where our oral history research starts. This is what, maybe just to give you the idea, what we are talking about. Adam already mentioned Czechoslovakia. So in 1948, in February, the communists took over, and that's why I also call my presentation Czech, and then in the bracket Slovak, because at that time it was the whole region of Czechoslovakia, which is now split into three countries, Czech Republic and Slovakia. Another map just showing some, not definitely all, but some of the major sites of imprisonment. Me personally, I am very much interested in this area, which is called Jáchymov district, or the district of Jáchymov. The name comes, of course, from Czech, because it is very close to the German border. It has also a German name which you might have heard before, Joachimsthal. The reason why you may have heard about it is that it was very rich in silver, and in the mountains, especially in the 14th and 15th centuries, the people were mining silver, and that's where the name tolar, nowadays dollar, has been introduced. The name of the coins, silver coins, were tolar. It comes from this very area, so that's just a small connection with the US now. There is a number of other former slave labor camps and prisons. Pardubice, for instance, I will talk about it, I will get back to this later. Pardubice prison was very famous for imprisoning women as well. Now, Jáchymov, I won't go into details, we don't have much time about it, but as I said, the whole mountain range was very rich in silver. Later on in the 20th century, it was discovered it was full of uranium. So a lot of political prisoners were imprisoned in the forced labor camps, and the purpose was they were digging and mining for uranium. Or, sad enough, the communist regime used exactly the same motto, to put it, which was used above the entrance to the camps, and meant exactly the same as Arbeitsmacherei in German. This is the way the camps look nowadays. What we are doing in our project is we are inviting the former political prisoners who are still alive to join us for the trips to the mountains and to show us the places where the actual camps were standing and were operating. And with their memories, we are trying to find out what was the purpose of these camps and how did they work. Unfortunately, there is not too many archival documents left, and these type of early stories help us understand how the whole process was working. The main wave of the political trials took 5 years, but doesn't mean that after 5 years it was all over. Since 1948 until 1953, there were 232 death penalties given to the former political prisoners. 178 were executed. We have to take in consideration that Czechoslovakia at that time had something about 13 million inhabitants. So comparing these numbers to the Gulag numbers is, of course, difficult because we are talking about Central Europe and about much smaller nation, though the numbers are still shocking in a way. 584 prisoners tried to escape from the camps and prisons, 31 were shot dead, and this all happened approximately in the 1950s. 15,000 prisoners at once were kept only in the Jáchymov district. I'm not mentioning the other resorts. We have one more big uranium mine not far from Prague as well, and there were even more, not more, but even other political prisoners. Altogether, in the 1950s, there were approximately 60,000 people who went to the Jáchymov district, mining uranium mostly, or taking care of the facilities around the mines. Now, this is just another information from the statistics. Every second male political prisoner had to dig for uranium in one of the 18 forced labor camps in Jáchymov. This is one of the few historical photos that we actually have in the archives. And what is maybe shocking about this all is that the whole district is lying just a few kilometers away from the border to, at that time, Western Germany. So many prisoners tried to escape and run away to Western Germany. Obviously, it was extremely difficult, and most of them were either shot to death while running, or later on sentenced to even bigger punishments or long stays in prison. What is very typical for the case of former Czechoslovak political prisoners, we are talking about the ghost of agents. That's a term that has been used by French scholar François Mayer, who is talking about this ghost in terms of all the Czech people, and this is actually valid even up to nowadays, are afraid that they are somehow registered or mentioned in the communist archives, and nobody actually knows what could be the interpretation of this kind of record. There could be people who openly collaborated with the communist regime. Maybe they did some criminal activities, maybe they did not. But at the same time, there are records and files of files on people who never have done anything, and they did not even know that they are being watched. And nowadays, we have the archives opened and we can access it, really. And the interpretation is extremely sensitive, and we have to be very careful about doing so, because we can do a lot of harm even though the communist regime is 20 years older. Now, I promised that the organizers I will also talk a bit about female political prisoners, because this is one of the important aspects. It is maybe, and I'm here not the expert to talk about this in detail, but it is maybe typical that men memories are much more heard from these times. But we have more than thousands of female prisoners as well. They all, and this is what Appelbaum already described in her splendid book Gulag, where they were able to take care about themselves in a much better way than men. And the Czech case can just confirm that. We have stories and many records of female political prisoners who were describing the ways they had to wash their dress in the toilets, how did they wash their hair, how did they keep themselves, how did they prepare all kinds of jewelry. And it is something that obviously men did not do. Some of my colleagues do take care of these aspects, and they keep writing about it because we find this very important. Political prisoners had to share cells. Again, I'm talking about the women prisoners with prostitutes, murderers, Nazi collaborators. That means that ladies that were sentenced for either helping to someone to flee the country, or maybe just talking to a friend who from some reason was considered an enemy of the state, they were sent to prison, and they had to stand very tragic conditions, approximately between 5 and 10 years. Those were the usual sentences. Some of the female prisoners were in prison even until the late 60s. So this is again Czechoslovakia and the inspiration by the Gulag system. So a few words about our narrators. Most of them are nowadays in their 80s. Those were the young people at that time in the late 40s, early 50s, who were for some reason sent to political prison, and most of them based on fabricated evidence. This is just a small example into the introduction to the legislation issue behind the whole process. The trials and the whole court usually revealed that some of the prisoners had arrived, the court had arrived at a conviction that the prisoner could have revealed. They actually did not do anything. They could have done it. And that's why they were sent to prison. Shocking enough, but this is what was happening. Now the project that I am working upon works, as I said, with archives and the survivors. We are trying to put these two aspects together. Very often it happens that the former prisoners never saw actually their files that were written by the communist secret police, and now we are trying to open the files for them and comment on this, because sometimes there is a clearly fabricated story in the file, and sometimes the file is exactly describing what the person did. So we cannot say that it always has been a completely fabricated case. This is making the whole issue even more complicated, because it is not so easy to say where they were making something up and where it really happened. You know, it just contributes to the repressive outcome of the whole process. And oral history is something that is combining it all together. We are working with audiovisual future because we believe that nowadays it is extremely important to take care of all the records, place it on the internet and share it, of course carefully, certain ethics, with young people. And just to give you a small information from the background of our project, none of us has actually a personal family motivation to study the topic. We don't have, luckily, any family experience. Our interest, let's say, is purely in silent memories from the scientific reasons. Let's say, maybe this is an important aspect to be mentioned. Well, this is just a typical way. There is a lot of work before we approach the narrators. It is a lot of recordings, as you all know, oral history. That's the way it is. I will just make this faster. And I think this would be similar to what Adam has presented, the cases in Gulag and in Soviet Russia. We ask our prisoners about what has happened, where, why, and we are trying to confront their memory with the history. That's the main goal. Of course, the whole issue is dealing with traumatic past, and we are facing very similar cases of injustice, torture, guards aggression. There is no need to stress this. It was almost the same conditions geographically. We are in Central Europe, we are placed in Central Europe, so the mountain range, for instance, in the Archimov that I mentioned earlier, it suffers from severe winters, 3-4 months per year, and of course the conditions also contributed to torturing the prisoners. There are voices that stress the fact that this was the reason why the people were sent. There are also other scholars who mention the economical part of it, because of course excavating and mining for uranium has been a very dangerous work, and political prisoners were cheap labor force. If I'm not mistaken, it was Tony Chut who once mentioned that this may be one of the reasons why Czechoslovakia eventually ended up in the Soviet camp, because we just had a very rich uranium resort in the mountains of the Archimov, and that's why actually in the fall of 1945 the Soviet army already invaded that region and kept it like that until the end of communism. So this may be one of the reasons. What is more, there were different strategies developed by the prisoners, of course, the relations with the families, and active anti-communism behind the walls of prisons and camps, were one of the reasons why they could survive, why they could go on, because that's what was shaping their identity. They were, of course, persecuted even after they returned from prisons. Their children could not study. They could not find a regular job. These kind of things were going on until 1989 when communism collapsed. Forgiveness, therapy, self-confidence, visibility after 89. That's just many aspects I would love to comment on, but I don't know really how much time we have, so maybe I would leave it there. But the visibility after 1989 is obviously significant. Until 1989, we did not know how many political prisoners we ever had. Obviously, after 1989, we started to discover these stories, people, and all of the issues. Now, what am I doing is trying to invite young scholars to contribute to our volunteer research initiative. That's the website. It is being filled with reports, audiovisual materials, transcriptions of the stories, and we are also working on the English version. Forgive us the translations, but I brought some copies of this book. Feel free to use them and take them for free. This would be published. It is 10 stories of former Czechoslovak political prisoners, and we hold conferences, and you can find all the details on our website. Before we perhaps move to the session of questions and answers, I would like to share with you 2 more reports as well as adapted, and those would be 2 short sequences shot with 2 former political prisoners who went through certain tragic moments, obviously. I start with Mr. Kitska, who is a former Czechoslovak political prisoner of Slovak origin. I will make it faster. This is just the way he is sharing with us the memories of communism once he first came across the topic, and now maybe a little bit forward. It had a psychological effects of imprisonment.
čili zase byla ta učebníka, publikace. A nebo já vím, že když jde za aplikací, tak jsem měl pár desátky, protože jsem měl otázky tady předtím, předtím to být. Tak jsem na další letce, tak jsem to měl 52 kilo. Pak já si dával někdy na velkou vážu, jako na to řádě, tak něčím sám. Čím by měl, jak by se odkryl.
Jsi tam měl jednou nepříjemnou zkušenost s elektrickým proudem, nebo tak?
Jo, tak bylo to taky příští, že to tam nebyl. Přijde si takhle a podívat takový Afriky, občas a se vlasy, to se bylo asi rozvalí, to všechno poletělí. Tak se riziko. Tak jsem tak bylo za ručníka, nebyl to konflikt, to byla tak krásná pana. Voda čistilka. Tepla. Já už jsem že takhle se vybrát do ní a najednou to začalo se rozřečit. A to bylo poslední. Zmrkal jsem, znovu ale teď ruce nohy. Vypadl z těch hlavně vedla, ale to každý klub, kde se dostal tak něco koupit, tak ráno takovou. To přidělali tak mám se byl vykoupaný. No a
Dávám se tím naražil ještě vyšší?
We could go on with that, but there is much more on the website. I guess we're out of time. I have one more story, but this you can find on our website. So thank you very much for your attention.